This is Inside the Right. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, longtime Republican operative, Tim Miller. So, Tim, I want to talk about Tucker Carlson because he's been in the news a lot lately. This past week, he did his whole literal Soviet-style propaganda tour in Russia. Now, just prior to the situation with Navalny playing out, which I'll get to in a second, he had come out during a conference and discussed how, with regard to Vladimir Putin, how leadership requires killing people sometimes. Only days after, Alexei Navalny, who was Putin's chief rival, who was banished to a prison colony in Siberia, he was found dead. So kind of seemed like really poor timing for Tucker to have said what he said. Do you feel like he got out over his skis? Do you feel like there's any kind of feel like he had gone too far? He might regret saying what he did, given what would only happen a couple of days later?
And I think that it makes him look really freaking stupid.
Yeah.
The timing makes him look really stupid. But his whole Soviet tour made him look stupid. This notion that the grocery stores are better in Moscow, right, and that the safer streets. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is conscripting people into the military. It's like, well, no wonder that the streets aren't as crowded. It's because anybody that's out that would be out on the streets, Putin's sending to Ukraine to get killed.
Yeah.
And so I do think that the timing was very, very bad, but like the message was bad, right? Like inevitably Putin is assassinated. It's not like this is the first assassination, right? And so inevitably something like this was going to happen. It's just the stark comparison between Tucker, basically saying, oh, who doesn't, everyone's a killer, leaders are killers, and trying to create this false equivalence between democratic leaders in America and the West and Putin, to have him assassinate essentially his lead political rival right after that is a pretty bad split screen.
Do you feel like even for someone like Tucker, who kind of like his whole shtick, his whole branding is that he's able to tell the truth where the rest of the media lies, like he's like the real source of news. I mean, this was as close to abject state-sponsored propaganda as I've ever seen. And that is after watching Tucker Carlson on Fox News for the last 10 years. So do you feel like this, like how do his supporters watch that and not feel like that's even jumping the shark a little bit?
I mean, even in Russia, the Russians around Putin were saying that they thought Tucker went kind of easy on him, right? Like that was the report. So his supporters, I think maybe one way to encapsulate this, I don't know if this is a weird world we're in, but maybe the mean Tucker Carlson viewer might be Sarah Palin right now. So despite the fact she was a vice presidential candidate, she was never split any atoms, but she put up a meme after Tucker's interview with Putin, which was, it's that meme of two guys looking over a grave and smiling, and it was Putin and Tucker, and the grave was the media and Democrats. And I think that meme, as stupid as it is, gives you insight into like this warped worldview of a Tucker Carlson viewer where the top enemy in the country is liberal elites and the mainstream media, and anyone that is against them is good. It's an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation. And so I pray and hope that some of Tucker Carlson's viewers, this was even a step too far for. Right. But I think that for the ones who it wasn't, it's because they've somehow warped their brains in such a way that they think Putin is good because he is in conflict with the globalist elites.
But what do you think the win in that interview? I mean, like he didn't come out with anything like especially like novel. Like it was just basically like, at the end of the day, I think really the only thing that happened in this interview was that Tucker showed that he was capable of gushing over Vladimir Putin and doing some really basic level propaganda for the state. But I don't really understand what with regard to the Sarah Palin thing, how the Democrats were hurt by that,
Yeah. I think that for Tucker, what he feels like he's gained is attention, right? Yeah. And status. And it's like, I can go and do these sorts of interviews, and the New York Times and CNN can't. And so, it's like this weird kind of alpha power play dynamic. I agree with you. It's insane, and nothing was gained, and this was a gift to the Democrats, frankly, and it divides the right. If we're talking about inside the right, like either Republican senators that were criticizing him and others that were cheering him on. So obviously this hurts the right, but I think they look at it as oh, this is an alpha move, for our side.
Do you think that was not immediately undermined by your earlier point when even the Russians had come out and said, like, we expected a much tougher interview?
I do think it was undermined.
So, like,
I do think it was undermined.
And was that just a power play by Putin then, just to say like just to let you know I'm still the alpha here?
The whole thing was a power play by Putin. I don't know if you suffered through it, but like the first 25 minutes, Putin does a lecture on Russian history that is mostly not true, right? It's this kind of fantasy.
Was it basically
version of Russian
to
history?
just show that he could hold him hostage?
Yeah, it's kind of pat him on the head. Just be like, okay, good boy. Like, you come here,
You're
right?
going to sit and listen to me lecture you about nothing. And I know I'm lecturing you about nothing, but like you're going to sit there.
Yeah, and I do think that that worked for Putin, right? And so the question for Tucker is it worth getting pushed around by Putin and being made into like Putin's little bitch, basically, in order to demonstrate that you're a contrarian, that you're a free thinker, that you're, doing something that the other media wouldn't? And I think that's the highest and best purpose on the right now. Like, these guys just want to own the libs, own the media, and I think that is how he rationalizes it. But obviously, I think he looked horrible.
I do want to talk about the broader impact you think this is having on at least the faction of the Republican Party that listens to Tucker. Like, do you think that he is giving people a permission structure to be more pro-Russia at a time when like Russia is kind of flexing its muscles against democracies of the world and like trying to spread autocracy?
Yeah, I do. Well, I think that there are two things that are happening simultaneously, because Tucker is just, and Russia's actions, right? Both of these things happening simultaneously are just raising the stakes on this issue, right? Inside the right. And so I think that two things are happening. One is Tucker is definitely radicalizing a faction of the party towards Putin, but more appropriately, it's against America, against big city America, against Western culture, right? And saying that we are decadent and depraved or whatever, and that Russia is doing things right. And I think that it will push more of his viewers and his fans into being outright for authoritarianism, which is like a category difference from the Trumpy, I kind of want an autocrat, but I still want it to, and so I think that is dangerous and concerning. But I do think it's just so hackish and embarrassing that he kind of created a few of the more, whatever you want to call them, more mainstream, more old school Republicans found their backbone a little bit on the Ukraine aid bill, the clean one that wasn't with immigrations. 22 Republican senators voted for it. And I do think some of them feel like they're looking at Tucker, they're looking at Trump, and they're like, we have to have some self-respect and defend ourselves here. And so I think in some ways it's creating some intra-party friction that I think is hurting the Republicans.
Well, I guess that's the other side of that coin, is at the same time that certain Republicans are taking what Tucker is doing as a permission structure to move toward authoritarianism, move toward Donald Trump and Putin and that whole like anti-Western, anti-democratic small d and big D worldview. At the same time, is he also kind of hurting his own party by pushing some of those people who were teetering and like they're like, oh no, this is a step too far for me. I didn't sign up for this.
I do think so. And those are going to be key. It's a key constituency in Washington, because in order to get anything done, you need these Republicans, right? We're going to talk about this with regards to getting aid through the House. But I also think from a voter standpoint, right, the weirder and more authoritarian and creepy the right looks, the better it is going to be for Joe Biden, right? Like, Joe Biden is going to have to recover with the kind of Mitt Romney dads, the Wall Street Journal dads. And then here's what those guys don't want. They don't want Russian authoritarianism, right? Like, those guys were, they might have come around on Trump. There might be things about Trump that they like, but they still are Republicans of the old school that have hostile feelings towards Russia and are not looking for a dictatorship in America. And so the more they're actively pushing for that publicly, I think the worse it is for the party.
What is the electoral strategy for them? Like, wouldn't you assume that these people are at least smart enough to recognize what you just said, what we can all see, which is like a good portion of the Republic. Like, this is an issue that unites Democrats and divides Republicans, to use a phrase phrase that Dan Pfeiffer uses quite often. But that's an issue that they should kind of stay away from. So why dig into that, knowing like these guys are smart enough to know that this is an issue that divides their party? Why lean into something like this, especially when the number one thing you should be doing right now, if you're a Republican, is trying to like claw back so much of that base that seems to be fracturing over Trump and his legal issues and the authoritarianism and January 6th and abortion and on and on.
Because winning the internal fight for them is more important right now than winning elections. Not like for the Trump strategists, but for Tucker Carlson, for Bannon, for J.D. Vance, and like the nationalist types that are elected officials. Like their highest and best goal right now is we want to make this party more nationalist, more in our image. And in order to do that, like we need to fight this fight within the party right now. And so I think they are kind of chomping at the bit, really, to have this fight. And and I don't think that they're thinking about the Atlanta swing voting dad, right? Like that's not their motivation. They're trying to gain power within the conservative, power within the conservative ecosystem, and push out the Mitch McConnells of the world. And they're already winning that fight, but they're trying to put the finishing touches on it.
In terms of the finishing touches, I mean, like we're seeing these elections won by like 10,000 voters in Wisconsin, 20,000 voters in other states, 40,000 voters in Pennsylvania. I mean, in terms of remaking the party and their image, is there any worry for these Republicans that that they're going to push too many people out, that it's going to make them electorally a non-viable party, at least for the moment? Or is that just, or is that worth it if it means that they get to keep consolidating influence and power?
Well, I think part of it is that's worth it. I think that they're happy if there are only two major parties in the country and they get to control one of them, that's still pretty good. Yeah. Obviously, they'd like to win elections. I also think that a lot of them have convinced themselves that this is part of a realignment that is a winner for them. There's the kind of the old Matt Gaetz saying that he said a couple weeks ago that is pretty gross, but I think reflects the truth of their thinking. It's like for every Karen that we lose over taking these types of positions, we're picking up a Julio or a Jamal. And this is their theory of the case, that that economic nationalism, populism, is popular among working class voters of color that had been traditionally Democratic voters. And there's like this tiny iota of truth to it. Like those working class men, black men and Hispanic men have moved slightly towards the Republicans, but not in the margins that they need, to make up for these huge losses that they're taking among college-educated voters in the suburbs.
Yeah, I would also think like there is some the dichotomy here that I'm trying to like work through is Republicans will seek power by any means necessary. Donald Trump is a testament to exactly that. But at the same time, I do think that they enjoy trafficking in the world that is the minority, because then they don't have to actually try to govern. They can't do it. Yeah. Like they can't govern with their House majority right now. Like all they've managed to get done was expel a bunch of their own members and kick out one of their own speakers. But like
they don't want to govern.
They don't want to govern, but being in the minority kind of allows them to keep complaining and doing the fear-mongering and fundraising and building their brands and all the things that they seem to love doing without actually having power that they can then squander.
I think that that's very insightful and right. I mean, say what you want about the Mitch McConnell Republicans. They had some goals, right? Like Mitch McConnell wanted to take over the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Right. He had policy objectives that he wanted to achieve. Like besides deporting immigrants, like this MAGA group doesn't really. Yeah. And frankly, and actually doing policy only opens them up to criticism from people on the further right, because anything they can do, there could be somebody else, some other Trumper that will go out there and say that wasn't Trumpy, that wasn't MAGA enough, know. And so
I mean, look at Langford. They got the most conservative border bill that they will ever get, like at least in our lifetimes, especially with the Democratic president, and certainly the only one that could have gotten approved through both houses and the White House, and it wasn't good enough. I mean, Langford got called out by the Oklahoma Republican Party.
Yeah, annihilated. And on Fox News, Langford shared the story where he said the Fox News host says, I'm going to ruin you over this. What could it be? There's no policy that they could get forth that wouldn't get that treatment. And so I do think that there's a lot of them that are kind of happy to be in the minority, frankly.
Well, with that said, obviously a lot to stay on top of on this front, especially as it relates to Tucker Carlson. If you want to hear more from Tim, you can check out The Bulwark. Make sure to subscribe. I'll put the link right here on this screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.